Waitress humiliates customer, then learns he's the new owner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at Benny's diner, casting a harsh glow on the worn linoleum floor. Sarah wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, already feeling drained even though her shift had barely started. The evening rush was picking up, and the clatter of dishes mixed with the sizzle of burgers on the grill created that familiar chaotic symphony she'd known for the past 8 years. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Order up. Joey, the cook, called out, sliding 2 plates of meatloaf onto the pass-through window. His face was red from the kitchen heat, and sweat dampened his paper hat. Sarah grabbed the plates, balancing them expertly as she'd done thousands of times before. "Table 4's been waiting 20 minutes for these," she muttered, loud enough for Joey to hear. "Guess timing isn't your strong suit today." "Hey, I'm doing my best back here," Joey shot back, but Sarah was already walking away, her comfortable but worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the floor. The diner itself was like a time capsule from the 1970s, with its red vinyl booths showing cracks that had been patched up so many times they looked like road maps. The jukebox in the corner hadn't worked right since last summer, occasionally springing to life with random songs in the middle of the night shift. But it was home, in its own weird way, even if Sarah wouldn't admit it out loud. She delivered the meatloaf plates to the elderly couple at table 4, forcing a tight smile. "Sorry for the wait, folks. Kitchen's running a bit behind tonight." The woman opened her mouth to complain, but Sarah had already turned away, heading to check on her other tables. The rumors about the diner being sold had everyone on edge. Sarah had overheard Paul, the owner, talking in hushed tones on the phone earlier that week. After 30 years of running the place, word was he was finally ready to retire. The thought made Sarah's stomach twist. Change wasn't exactly her favorite thing, and she'd gotten comfortable with how things worked around here, even if she complained about it daily. Sarah called Linda from behind the counter. The older waitress was trying to manage both the register and a line of takeout orders. "Can you grab table 7? I'm swamped here." Sarah glanced at the table in question and saw a guy sitting there, probably in his 30s, dressed in what looked like casual designer clothes. He stuck out like a sore thumb among their usual crowd of truckers, retirees, and local factory workers. His calm demeanor as he studied the menu irritated her immediately. People who took their sweet time during the dinner rush were her pet peeve. She grabbed her notepad from her apron pocket, already feeling her patience wearing thin. The day had been one thing after another. The coffee maker had broken down during the morning rush. 2 servers had called in sick, and now this guy looked like he was settling in to read the menu like it was a novel. As she approached his table, Sarah noticed more details about him. His watch probably cost more than she made in a month, and his casual outfit screamed, "I'm trying not to look expensive, but everything I'm wearing is designer." He had that look about him, the kind of person who probably hadn't worked a real day in his life, who'd never had to deal with aching feet and coffee stains and customers who thought leaving $3 was a generous tip. She stopped at his table, pen poised over her notepad, and waited. And waited. He kept reading the menu as if he was studying for a test, occasionally nodding to himself. Sarah's pen tapped against the pad with increasing frequency, a steady rhythm of irritation. Finally, she cleared her throat. "You need a few more minutes?" The sarcasm in her voice was thick enough to spread on toast, but the man didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't show it. He looked up with a smile that seemed genuine, which somehow made it worse. "Oh, I'm sorry. Just trying to decide between the classic burger and the patty melt. What would you recommend?" Sarah's eye roll was automatic. "They're both burgers. One's on regular bread, one's on a bun. Can't go wrong either way." She shifted her weight to her other foot, watching as he considered this oversimplified description. Behind her, she could hear the growing bustle of the dinner rush. More customers were filing in, the bell above the door chiming every few minutes. The sounds of conversations, silverware clinking against plates, and Joey calling out orders created a crescendo of chaos that made her even more impatient with this indecisive customer. "I'll go with the classic burger then," he said finally, closing the menu and handing it to her with that same irritating smile. "Medium rare, please. And could I get extra pickles?" Sarah scribbled down the order, not bothering to write extra pickles, since Joey always threw on plenty anyway. "Fries okay with that?" she asked, already writing it down before he could answer. "That would be perfect, thank you." His politeness was starting to get under her skin. In her experience, people who were this nice usually wanted something or were about to complain about everything. As she turned to head to the kitchen, she heard him call after her. "Oh, and could I get a coffee too?" She stopped, took a deep breath, and turned back around. "Regular or decaf?" "Regular, please." "Black is fine." Sarah nodded and walked away, muttering under her breath about people who ordered coffee at dinner time. She slapped the order ticket on the kitchen window's spinner and grabbed a coffee pot, wondering if she should bring him decaf just out of spite. But habits died hard, and she automatically reached for the regular pot. The diner's atmosphere was getting more hectic by the minute. The dinner rush was in full swing now, with most tables filled and a small line forming at the door. The ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, doing little to disperse the growing warmth from the packed dining room and busy kitchen. Sarah dropped off the coffee at the man's table without a word, already turning to handle her other customers. She had 6 tables going now, and each one seemed to need something different. Table 2 wanted extra napkins, Table 5 was complaining about their soup being too hot, and the regulars at the counter needed their coffee topped off. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her mood souring with each passing minute. The rumors about the diner's sale kept creeping into her thoughts, making her responses to customers shorter and her movements more abrupt. What would happen to all of them if some corporate chain bought the place? Would they all be replaced with perky 20-somethings who said things like, "Hi, welcome to Happy Burger," with fake enthusiasm? The mystery man's burger came up on the pass-through window, and Sarah grabbed it, noting that Joey had actually remembered to put extra pickles on it without being reminded. She delivered it to his table with a quick, "Here you go," already turning away before he could respond. "Excuse me," he called after her. Sarah stopped, counting to 3 in her head before turning back around. "Yes," she managed, trying to keep the edge out of her voice and failing miserably. "Could I get some ketchup, please?" Sarah pointed to the ketchup bottle sitting right next to the napkin dispenser on his table. "It's right there." He glanced at it, then back at her with that annoyingly calm smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it." "Thank you." Sarah walked away, shaking her head. The evening continued its downward spiral as more customers filed in. The kitchen fell behind on orders, and the air conditioning struggled to keep up with the heat of bodies packed into the small diner. Through it all, she kept noticing the man at table 7 from the corner of her eye. He ate slowly, methodically, occasionally glancing around the diner as if he was taking mental notes. Something about his behavior set off warning bells in her head, but she was too busy to dwell on it. The fluorescent lights continued their endless buzz overhead, and the smell of burgers and fries filled the air. Outside, the sky was darkening, and the neon sign that reads Benny's Diner flickered to life, casting a red glow through the windows. Just another night at the diner, Sarah thought, though something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the rumors about the sale, or maybe it was that strange customer at table 7, but something told her this shift was going to be more memorable than most. The dinner rush was starting to wind down, but Sarah's mysterious customer showed no signs of leaving. He'd finished his burger a while ago, but kept nursing his coffee, which she had to admit she'd been refilling regularly despite her annoyance. Each time she approached his table, he looked up with that same relaxed expression that made her want to scream. "Everything okay with your meal?" she asked during one of these coffee refills, more out of habit than actual concern. "It was excellent, thank you." He set his cup down carefully on the saucer. "Actually, I was wondering, how long has this place been around?" Sarah barely held back a groan. She hated when customers tried to make small talk, especially ones who were camping out at their tables. "Long enough," she replied, then added with a hint of sarcasm, "We're practically a historic landmark." Instead of being put off by her tone, he chuckled. The architecture suggests late 1960s, but the interior feels more 70s. Was it always a diner's? "Look," Sarah said, shifting her weight to one hip, "it's just an old greasy spoon, okay? Been here forever. Probably will be here forever. Unless the new owners tear it down and put up a fast food joint. The last part slipped out before she could stop herself, her worry about the rumors showing through. The man's eyebrows raised slightly at this, but his expression remained annoyingly pleasant. New owners? Is the diner changing hands? That's just talk. Sarah backpedaled, mentally kicking herself for mentioning it. Did you want anything else, or are you good with a coffee? Actually, I'd love to try a piece of pie. What would you recommend? Sarah fought the urge to roll her eyes. We've got apple, cherry, and lemon meringue. They're all fine. What's your favorite? They're all exactly the same to me. I don't actually eat pie for a living. He smiled again, seemingly amused by her response. Let's go with apple then. And maybe you could tell me about some of your regular customers? This place seems to have quite a community feel to it. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Was he seriously trying to interview her about the diner? She had other tables to handle, even if the rush was dying down. Look, do you want something or not? She snapped, her patience finally wearing thin. The apple pie would be wonderful. Thank you, he replied, completely unfazed by her outburst. And maybe another coffee? Sarah turned on her heel and headed for the pie case, muttering under her breath about people who had nothing better to do than sit around all night asking stupid questions. She could feel Linda watching her from behind the counter, probably wondering why she was being so sharp with a customer who seemed perfectly pleasant. At the pie case, she jabbed the server knife into the apple pie with more force than necessary. Some people just don't know when to leave, she grumbled to herself, dropping the slice onto a plate. Joey poked his head through the kitchen window. That guy giving you trouble, Sarah? No, he's just... She waved her hand vaguely, being weird. Asking all these questions about the diner like he's writing a book or something. Maybe he is, Joey shrugged. Better than the usual complaints about the food being too hot or too cold. Sarah snorted and grabbed the coffee pot. As she approached table 7 again, she noticed the man had taken out a small notebook and was writing something down. Great, she thought, maybe he really was writing a book. Just what they needed, some wannabe food critic doing a story about small-town diners. She set down the pie and filled his coffee cup, trying to ignore the notebook. But curiosity got the better of her. What are you writing? She asked, her tone making it clear she wasn't actually interested in the answer. Just some notes, he replied, closing the notebook with a smile. This pie looks delicious. It's just pie, Sarah said flatly. We get it from the same supplier as every other diner in town. The man took a bite of the pie and nodded appreciatively. Sometimes the simplest things are the best, don't you think? Like this diner. It's not trying to be anything it's not. There's something honest about that. Sarah felt her eye twitch. Was he making fun of them? Yeah. We're real salt of the earth here, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Regular down-home cooking and hometown values. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for? A few tables away, she heard Linda clear her throat loudly, a warning sign that her attitude was getting out of hand. But Sarah was beyond caring at this point. This guy, with his fancy clothes and his notebook and his endless questions, was really getting under her skin. Actually, he said, taking another bite of pie, I'm just interested in understanding what makes places like this tick. The relationships, the daily rhythms, the little details that make it special. Special? Sarah couldn't help but laugh. Mister, it's a diner. People come in hungry, they eat, they leave. Sometimes they complain about the coffee or stiff us on the tip. That's about all there is to it. He looked around the room thoughtfully. I don't know about that. I've been watching all evening. I saw how you knew exactly what Mr. Thompson at the counter wanted before he asked. 2 sugars in his coffee and extra gravy on his mashed potatoes. And how you made sure Mrs. Chen got her soup extra hot, just the way she likes it. Those seem like pretty special relationships to me. Sarah felt her face flush. She hadn't realized he'd been paying such close attention. That's just doing my job, she mumbled, suddenly uncomfortable with his observations. And you do it well, he said simply, taking another sip of his coffee. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, threw her off balance. She wasn't used to customers noticing the little things she did for the regulars. Usually, they just complained about the wait times or the prices going up. Whatever, she said, trying to regain her footing. You need anything else, or are you good with the interrogation for now? He smiled that infuriating smile again. The pie is perfect, thank you. Though I would love to speak with your manager when you have a moment. Sarah's stomach dropped. So that's what this was all about. He was going to complain about her attitude. Well, fine. It wouldn't be the first time, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Something wrong with your service? She asked, unable to keep the defensive tone out of her voice. Not at all, he replied calmly. I just have some business to discuss with them. Right, Sarah said, not believing him for a second. I'll let Paul know. As she walked away, she could feel the man's eyes following her. Other servers were watching too, probably wondering what was about to go down. Sarah had built up quite a reputation for her sharp tongue over the years, and everyone knew it was just a matter of time before it got her in real trouble. She found Paul in his tiny office, going through receipts with his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Hey, Paul. Guy at table 7 wants to talk to you. Says it's about business. Paul looked up, his forehead creasing with concern. Everything okay out there? Oh, sure, Sarah said, trying to sound casual. He's just been asking a bunch of weird questions about the diner all night. Probably wants to complain about my sparkling personality. Paul sighed and took off his glasses. Sarah, we've talked about this. You can't keep Yeah, I know, she cut him off. Customer service is our priority. Happy customers mean better tips. All that stuff. Look, do you want to talk to him or not? Paul stood up, straightening his worn polo shirt with the Benny's Diner logo. I'll handle it. Try not to scare off any more customers while I'm gone, okay? Sarah watched him head out to table 7, her stomach churning with a mix of defiance and worry. She'd worked at Benny's for 8 years, and while her attitude had gotten her in hot water before, something about this felt different. Maybe it was the rumors about the diner being sold, or maybe it was the way that customer had been watching everything so carefully, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. She busied herself with wiping down empty tables, trying not to look too obvious about watching Paul's conversation with the mystery man. But she couldn't help noticing how Paul's whole demeanor changed as soon as he reached the table. His shoulders straightened, and his casual manner shifted into something more formal. Something was definitely up, and Sarah had a feeling she wasn't going to like whatever it was. Sarah kept one eye on Paul's conversation with the mystery customer while she cleared tables, trying to read their body language. Something was off about the whole situation. Paul wasn't acting like he usually did when dealing with customer complaints. There was none of his usual apologetic nodding or placating gestures. Instead, he was sitting up straight, listening intently, occasionally making notes on a napkin. Hey, Linda whispered, sliding up next to her. What's going on over there? Paul looks like he's interviewing for a job. No idea, Sarah muttered, stacking plates with more force than necessary. The guy's been weird all night, asking questions about the diner, taking notes. Maybe he's some kind of health inspector or something. Linda snorted. Health inspector? Dressed like that? In the middle of dinner service? Come on, Sarah. Use your head. Before Sarah could respond, she noticed the man gesturing in her direction. Paul turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. It wasn't anger or disappointment. She was used to those. This was something else entirely. Sarah, Paul called out, waving her over. Could you come here for a moment? She took her time finishing with the plates, then wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to table 7. Up close, she could see that Paul's face was slightly flushed, and he kept adjusting his collar like he did when he was nervous. What's up? She asked, trying to sound casual while bracing for whatever was coming. Sarah, Paul said, his voice oddly formal, I'd like you to properly meet Mr. Grant. The man, Mr. Grant, stood up and extended his hand. It's nice to officially meet you, Sarah. I've enjoyed our interactions this evening. Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, her mind racing. The way Paul was acting, the man's expensive clothes, all those questions about the diner. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Her face went hot, then cold, as realization dawned. You're the new owner, she said flatly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Grant nodded, his hand still extended. I am, though I prefer to think of myself as more of a caretaker for places like this. Sarah mechanically shook his hand, her brain struggling to process what was happening. All those sarcastic comments, the eye rolls, The muttered complaints, she'd been directing them at her new boss. Her stomach felt like it was trying to tie itself in knots. I didn't, she started, but couldn't find the words to finish. Why don't you take a break, Sarah? Paul suggested gently. Linda can cover your tables for a few minutes. Sarah nodded numbly and headed for the back door, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She pushed through the heavy metal door into the alley behind the diner, where the evening air hit her like a slap in the face. Stupid, 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 she muttered, pacing back and forth between the dumpster and the stack of empty produce crates. How could she have been so blind? Of course, he wasn't just some random customer. The clothes, the questions, the way he'd been observing everything, it all made perfect sense now. The back door creaked open, and Linda stuck her head out. You okay, honey? Sarah laughed, but it came out sounding more like a bark. Oh, yeah, I'm great. I just spent the last 2 hours being a complete jerk to the new owner of the diner. Why wouldn't I be okay? Linda stepped fully into the alley, letting the door close behind her. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. He didn't seem angry. That's almost worse, Sarah groaned, leaning against the brick wall. He just sat there taking it all in, probably making notes about my attitude the whole time. I bet he can't wait to clean house and bring in some perky new staff who actually know how to smile. Linda pulled out her cigarettes and offered one to Sarah, who hadn't smoked in years but suddenly felt like now might be a good time to start again. She waved it away, running her hands through her hair instead. You know what the worst part is? Sarah continued, unable to stop the words from spilling out. He was actually being nice. Like genuinely nice. And I just kept getting more and more irritated because I thought he was mocking us or something. Well, Linda said, taking a drag from her cigarette, you've never been great at handling nice people. They make you suspicious. Thanks for the personality assessment, Sarah muttered, but there was no real bite to her words. She was too busy replaying every interaction with Mr. Grant in her head, each memory making her cringe harder than the last. The back door opened again, and this time it was Joey poking his head out. Hey, Sarah? Paul's asking for you. Says, Mr. Grant wants to talk to you before he leaves. Sarah's stomach lurched. Great. Probably wants to fire me in person. Very professional of him. Stop being dramatic, Linda said, stubbing out her cigarette. Just go hear what he has to say. Can't make things any worse, right? Thanks for the vote of confidence, Sarah replied, but she straightened up and smoothed down her apron. Might as well face the music with some dignity. Back inside, the diner had quieted down considerably. The dinner rush was over, and only a few regular customers remained, nursing cups of coffee and picking at pieces of pie. Mr. Grant was still at table 7, but Paul had returned to the counter, pretending to be very interested in organizing menus. Sarah approached the table, trying to keep her voice steady. You wanted to see me, Mr. Grant? He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Please sit down for a moment. Sarah slid into the booth, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. The vinyl seat squeaked under her, the sound unnaturally loud in her ears. I imagine you're feeling pretty uncomfortable right now, Mr. Grant said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sarah let out a short laugh. That's one way to put it. I want you to know that I wasn't trying to trick you or test you tonight. I simply wanted to experience the diner as a regular customer would. To see how it really operates, not how people might act if they knew who I was. Well, you certainly got the full experience, Sarah said, unable to keep the bitterness out of her voice. Complete with surly waitress and everything. Mr. Grant leaned forward slightly. What I got was an honest experience. You weren't putting on an act or trying to impress anyone. That's valuable information for someone in my position. Sarah looked up at him, trying to read his expression. Was he serious? Or was this just his way of letting her down easy before firing her? Paul tells me you've been here 8 years, Mr. Grant continued. That's a long time to stick with one place in this industry. Yeah, well, Sarah shrugged. It's not like I planned it. It just kind of happened. Things rarely go according to plan, Mr. Grant agreed. But sometimes that's for the best. Paul also tells me you know this place inside and out. That you're the first one here when someone calls in sick, and the last to leave when things get busy. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wasn't used to people talking about her work ethic, Usually, they just focused on her attitude. "Look, Mr. Grant," she started. "If you're trying to find a nice way to fire me, he held up a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not firing you, Sarah. In fact, I'd like to discuss something else entirely with you. But that can wait until tomorrow. It's been a long night, and I think we could both use some time to process everything." Sarah stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it didn't, she managed to ask, "So, I still have a job?" Mr. Grant smiled. That same calm smile that had irritated her so much earlier, but now seemed almost reassuring. "Yes, you still have a job. Though we might need to have a conversation about customer service at some point." Sarah felt her face flush again, but this time with relief rather than embarrassment. "That's fair," she admitted. "Good," Mr. Grant said, standing up and leaving a generous tip on the table. "I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. We can talk more then." Sarah watched him gather his things, still not quite believing how the evening had turned out. As he reached the door, he turned back and caught her eye. "Oh, and Sarah? The pie really was excellent." She watched him disappear into the night, the bell above the door jingling softly in his wake. The diner felt different somehow, as if the air itself had changed. Or maybe it was just her perspective that had shifted. Either way, she had a feeling things at Benny's diner were about to change in ways she never could have expected. And surprisingly, the thought didn't terrify her as much as it probably should have. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Sarah went through the motions of closing, wiping tables, refilling sugar dispensers, counting her tips. But her mind kept replaying every interaction with Mr. Grant. Each remembered moment made her want to crawl under a booth and hide. "You're going to wear a hole in that table if you keep wiping it," Linda said, startling Sarah out of her thoughts. She looked down to realize she'd been cleaning the same spot for several minutes. "Sorry," Sarah mumbled, moving to the next table. "I just keep thinking about what a complete idiot I was." "Hey, we've all had those moments," Linda said, starting to stack chairs. "Remember when I spent 20 minutes complaining about the new health inspector, only to find out I was talking to his wife?" Sarah couldn't help but smile a little. "Yeah, but at least you didn't spend 2 hours being a total jerk to your new boss." "True," Linda admitted. "But he seemed to take it pretty well. Maybe he's used to dealing with grumpy waitresses." Joey called out from the kitchen where he was cleaning the grill. "Or maybe he just appreciates honesty." "I mean, you weren't putting on an act, Sarah. That's gotta count for something." Sarah snorted. "Yeah, I was just my genuine, charming self. Lucky me." But as she continued with her closing duties, she found herself thinking about what Joey had said. She had been genuine, even if that genuineness came in the form of sarcasm and impatience. Would it have been better if she'd been fake nice like those servers at chain restaurants, with their forced smiles and scripted cheerfulness? The night air was cool when she finally left the diner, her purse heavy with tips, but her mind heavier with thoughts. The neon sign flickered above her, casting alternating shadows on the cracked sidewalk. She'd walked this same path hundreds of times after closing, but tonight felt different. At home, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her tiny apartment above the laundromat hummed with the familiar sound of dryers running late into the night, but even that usually comforting white noise couldn't quiet her mind. She sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold, and really thought about her behavior for the first time in years. She'd always prided herself on being real with people. No fake smiles, no pretending everything was perfect when it wasn't. But when had that morphed into just being plain difficult? When had her direct approach turned into something harder, more defensive? The faces of regular customers floated through her mind. Old Mr. Thompson, who came in every morning for his coffee and eggs, always telling the same jokes that she barely bothered to smile at anymore. The Chin family, who owned the Chinese restaurant down the street and stopped by for pie after closing their own place, always grateful for a friendly face, though lately, she hadn't been very friendly. Even the teenagers who came in after football games, loud and rowdy but always polite, leaving their tables clean and trying to pool enough money for decent tips. She'd started seeing them as annoying disruptions rather than the good kids they were. Sarah got up and paced her small apartment, pausing at the window that overlooked Main Street. The diner's neon sign was visible from here, a familiar beacon in the night. She'd taken this job right after high school, telling herself it was just temporary, just until she figured out what she really wanted to do with her life. But somewhere along the way, the temporary had become permanent. The diner had become home, its rhythms as familiar as her own heartbeat. And instead of embracing that, she'd grown bitter about it, letting that bitterness seep into every interaction. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just been rude to Mr. Grant. She'd been pushing everyone away, building walls with sharp words and cold shoulders. And for what? To protect herself from admitting that she actually cared about this place, these people? Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Stop overthinking everything and get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day. Sarah smiled despite herself. Linda had always been able to read her like a book, but sleep felt impossible right now. She was too busy remembering all the little moments she'd dismissed or ignored over the years. Like how Joey always made sure to save her a plate of whatever special he was trying out, even though she usually just picked at it and made sarcastic comments. Or how Paul had covered her shift no questions asked when her mom was in the hospital last year, then refused to let her make it up to him. These people weren't just coworkers, they were family. A dysfunctional, coffee-stained family, but family nonetheless. And she'd been treating them like inconveniences. The sound of a car backfiring outside made her jump, and she realized she'd been standing at the window for over an hour. The sky was starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the buildings downtown. She had to be back at the diner in 5 hours for her next shift. Sarah finally crawled into bed, her mind still racing but in a different direction now. Instead of replaying her embarrassing moments with Mr. Grant, she found herself thinking about changes she could make. Small things, maybe, but important ones. She could start by actually listening when Mr. Thompson tells his jokes, even if she's heard them 100 times. She could learn the names of the football players who come in after games, maybe keep track of their scores. She could stop acting like every customer question was a personal inconvenience. The thought of changing her ways was scary. She'd built her whole identity around being the tough, no-nonsense waitress who didn't take any crap. But maybe there was a middle ground between being a pushover and being who she'd become. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah thought about what Mr. Grant had said about having another conversation tomorrow. She'd expected to be fired, but instead, he seemed to have something else in mind. What could he possibly want to discuss with her? After her behavior tonight, she couldn't imagine it would be anything good. But then again, he had surprised her once already. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would bring something unexpected. The thought followed her into her dreams, where she served coffee to smiling customers in a diner that looked just like Benny's, but somehow brighter, warmer, more welcoming. When her alarm went off a few hours later, Sarah woke up with a clearer head than she'd had in years. She couldn't change what had happened with Mr. Grant, but she could change what happened next. It wouldn't be easy. Old habits die hard, after all. But as she got dressed for her shift, she found herself actually looking forward to trying. The morning sun was just starting to warm the sidewalks as she walked to work, her steps quicker and lighter than usual. The diner's sign was dark now, but she knew in a few hours it would be buzzing back to life, just like it had every day for decades. Only this time, she'd be facing it with a different attitude. Whether Mr. Grant gave her a chance to prove herself or not, Sarah had decided it was time for a change. She'd spent too long hiding behind her sharp tongue and harder shell. Maybe it was time to let some of that go, to remember why she'd stayed at Benny's all these years in the first place. The diner's keys jingled in her hand as she approached the door, ready to start another day. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was walking towards something rather than just going through the motions. The morning shift crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah kept glancing at the clock, knowing Mr. Grant would be coming in during the afternoon lull. She'd barely slept, but somehow felt more alert than ever, hyper-aware of every interaction with her customers. She found herself making small changes almost without thinking. When Mr. Thompson came in for his usual breakfast, she actually listened to his joke about the penguin and the mechanic and surprised both of them by laughing, not because it was particularly funny, but because his eyes lit up when he told it. "Well, look who woke up on the right side of the bed," he said, beaming at her response. Maybe I just finally developed a sense of humor, she replied, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee. The morning regulars noticed the difference too. She caught several of them exchanging glances when she asked Mrs. Chun about her grandchildren and actually waited for the answer. Even Joey poked his head out of the kitchen at one point, pretending to check his thermometer. "What?" she asked him. "Just making sure hell hasn't frozen over," he grinned. "You haven't rolled your eyes once this morning. Keep it up and I might start again," she threatened, but there was no real edge to her words. As the lunch rush died down, Sarah's nervousness began to build again. She kept straightening things that didn't need straightening, wiping down clean counters and reorganizing the already organized condiment stations. "Sarah," Linda finally said, catching her rearranging the sugar packets for the third time, "you're going to wear yourself out before he even gets here. Take a break." But Sarah couldn't sit still. She kept thinking about what she wanted to say to Mr. Grant, rehearsing different versions of an apology in her head. Everything sounded either too formal or not sincere enough. When the bell above the door chimed around 2 o'clock, Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. But it was just a couple of teenagers coming in for late lunch. She tried to ignore their confused looks when she greeted them with a genuine smile and actually asked how their day was going. Finally, at exactly 2:30, Mr. Grant walked in. He was dressed more formally today in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, but still carried himself with that same calm demeanor that had irritated her so much yesterday. Today, though, she recognized it for what it was: confidence without arrogance. He caught her eye and nodded, then took a seat at the counter rather than his booth from yesterday. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped her suddenly sweaty palms on her apron, and walked over. "Coffee?" she offered, already reaching for a cup. "Please," he smiled. "And maybe we could talk for a few minutes?" "When you have time, of course." Sarah glanced around the diner. The after-lunch lull was in full swing, with only a handful of customers scattered around the tables. Linda caught her eye and nodded, silently offering to cover for her. "I can talk now," Sarah said, then added, "Actually, I'd like to say something first, if that's okay." Mr. Grant gestured to the empty stool next to him. "I'm all ears." Sarah poured his coffee, then one for herself, something she never did during her shift. But today felt like a coffee conversation kind of day. She settled onto the stool, took a sip for courage, and turned to face him. "I owe you an apology," she started, the words coming out in a rush. "My behavior yesterday was completely unprofessional. I was rude and sarcastic, and you didn't deserve that. No customer does, really, but especially not." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at him. "The new owner," he supplied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yeah," she said, feeling her face flush. "That." Mr. Grant took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "Can I ask you something, Sarah? What made you stay at Benny's all these years?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected a lecture about customer service, not this. I guess I never really thought about it. It just kind of happened. Things don't just happen for 8 years, he said gently. There must be something that kept you here. Sarah stared into her coffee cup, thinking, the people maybe? I mean, not just the customers, but everyone. Joey, Linda, Paul, they're like family. A weird, dysfunctional family, but still. She paused, surprised by her own honesty. I didn't always appreciate that, though. Actually, I probably never showed it at all. Mr. Grant nodded. That's exactly what I saw yesterday, you know. Not just a waitress doing her job, but someone who knows every regular's order by heart, who notices when the coffee's running low before anyone has to ask, who jumps in to help her coworkers without being asked. You care about this place, even if you try to hide it behind that tough exterior. Sarah felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Yeah, well, fat lot of good that does now. The diner's being sold. Everything's going to change, and my attitude probably hasn't helped anything. About that, Mr. Grant said, turning to face her fully. I have a proposition for you. Sarah braced herself, expecting some kind of probationary period or strict new rules about customer service. Instead, what he said next nearly made her fall off her stool. I want you to manage the diner. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You what? I want you to manage Benny's, he repeated. I've been watching how you work, talking to Paul and the others. You know this place inside and out. You understand its rhythms, its people. Yes, you need to work on your customer service approach, but that's something that can be learned. What can't be taught is the kind of dedication you've shown to this place, even if you express it uniquely. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she managed to say, "But I was awful to you yesterday." Mr. Grant laughed. "You were honest. Brutally honest, maybe, but honest nonetheless. And that's what I need in a manager, someone who sees things as they are, not as they wish them to be. Someone who cares enough to stay for 8 years, even while pretending not to care at all." "I don't know anything about managing a restaurant," Sarah protested weakly. "You know more than you think. And what you don't know, you can learn. I'm not saying it will be easy. There will be changes, improvements that need to be made. But I want someone who knows the heart of this place to help make those changes." Sarah's mind was spinning. Can I think about it?" "Of course," Mr. Grant nodded. "Take the day. Talk it over with your coworkers if you want. I'll come back tomorrow for your answer." He stood up, leaving money on the counter for his coffee. "Oh, and Sarah, that attitude of yours? Don't lose it entirely. Just channel it better. Sometimes a little edge is exactly what a place needs to keep it real." Sarah watched him leave, still trying to process what had just happened. Behind her, she heard Linda's voice. "Well, are you going to take it?" She turned to find not just Linda, but Joey and Paul too, all watching her with varying degrees of excitement and anticipation. "You knew about this?" she asked Paul. He shrugged, smiling. "Mr. Grant asked my opinion. I told him you were either the best or worst choice he could make, but either way, it would definitely be interesting." Sarah looked around at their faces. These people who had put up with her attitude for years, who had become her family, whether she wanted one or not. Then she looked around the diner itself, with its worn booths and humming fluorescent lights and endless coffee refills. For the first time, she let herself really feel it. This was home. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending otherwise. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Her apartment felt too small, too confining for the magnitude of the decision she faced. She paced from her tiny kitchen to her equally tiny living room, stopping occasionally to stare out the window at the diner's neon sign glowing in the distance. Around midnight, she dug out an old spiral notebook from her junk drawer and sat at her kitchen table. On one page, she started listing all the reasons she shouldn't take the job. "No management experience," she wrote. Then underneath, "Bad with people. Impatient. Can't fake being nice. Don't know anything about running a business. Might ruin everything." The list grew quickly, filling nearly the whole page. But as she wrote, she found herself adding little notes in the margins, arguing with her own points. "Next to bad with people," she scribbled, "but I know all the regulars' orders by heart. Besides, can't fake being nice," she added. "Maybe being real is better anyway?" Under "might ruin everything," she wrote, "or might make it better." Frustrated, she flipped to a new page and tried to imagine what changes she'd make if she did take the job. The ideas started flowing surprisingly easily. Little things at first: fixing the wobbly table by the window that everyone complained about, getting a new coffee maker that didn't sound like it was dying every morning, maybe updating the specials board so people could actually read it. But then bigger ideas started coming. Training programs for new servers so they'd know all the regular customers' preferences. A proper system for handling the dinner rush, instead of everyone just scrambling to keep up. Maybe even some new menu items that Joey had been wanting to try, but Paul had been too cautious to approve. Sarah found herself getting excited despite her best efforts not to. Then she remembered how she'd treated Mr. Grant, and her enthusiasm deflated. How could she manage other people when she couldn't even manage her own attitude? She got up and made herself a cup of tea, chamomile, though what she really wanted was coffee. As she waited for it to steep, she caught her reflection in the dark kitchen window. The same face she'd seen countless times in the diner's bathroom mirror during breaks, usually wearing an expression of annoyance or frustration. "Who are you kidding?" she asked her reflection. "You're not manager material. You're just a waitress with an attitude problem." But even as she said it, another voice in her head, one that sounded suspiciously like Linda, argued back. "And what's wrong with being a waitress? You've stuck with it this long for a reason." Sarah took her tea to the couch and curled up with her favorite worn blanket, the one she'd had since high school. She thought about all the changes she'd seen at the diner over the years. Servers who came and went, regular customers who stopped coming in or moved away, even the subtle shifts in the community itself as the town grew and changed. Through it all, Benny's had remained a constant. Sure, it was showing its age, and yeah, maybe she complained about it more than she should. But it was still there, still serving the same comfort food and bottomless coffee it always had. Still providing a place for people to gather, to share meals and stories and pieces of their lives. And she had been there too, watching it all, being part of it even when she pretended she wasn't. Maybe that's what Mr. Grant had seen. Not just her attitude, but her consistency, her reliability, her belonging. The thought made her uncomfortable. She'd spent so long pretending she was just passing through, just working there until something better came along. But what if this was the something better? What if it had been there all along, waiting for her to stop fighting it? Sarah pulled out her phone and started scrolling through old photos. She found one from last Christmas, when Joey had attempted to make a gingerbread house that looked more like it had survived a natural disaster. In the picture, she was rolling her eyes, but she was also smiling, a real smile, not the forced one she usually gave customers. There were others too, group shots from birthday celebrations, candid photos of regular customers, even a few selfies with Linda during slow afternoon shifts. Looking at them now, she could see a pattern she'd been blind to before. These weren't just random work photos. They were memories, moments, pieces of a life she'd built without really meaning to. Over the next several months, Benny's Diner blossoms under Sarah's leadership, revitalized with fresh decor, updated menus, and a warm, inviting atmosphere that resonates with the community. Sarah's journey has been marked by a slow but steady transformation, evolving from a short-tempered waitress into a leader respected by both customers and staff. As she reflects on the changes, she realizes just how much her life and outlook have shifted since that fateful night with Mr. Grant. What started as a warning and a wake-up call has now turned into an opportunity she cherishes each day. One evening, a particularly busy Friday night, Sarah is at her best, managing orders, overseeing the kitchen, and even bussing tables when necessary. She moves with energy and purpose, guiding her team through the rush with calm efficiency and even a few jokes to keep spirits high. Regulars and newcomers alike notice the difference in the diner's atmosphere, with old patrons commenting on how much more inviting it feels. They see the change in Sarah's attitude firsthand, and many who had once been wary of her sharp tongue now seek out her table, enjoying her humor and warmth. Around mid-evening, Mr. Grant arrives, and Sarah greets him with a bright smile, shaking his hand warmly as she leads him to a table near the window. This time, she's not nervous, she's proud. She's confident in her role, and her ease shows. Mr. Grant orders as usual, and Sarah personally makes sure his meal is prepared to perfection. As she brings his plate to the table, he looks up with a twinkle in his eye and compliments her on how far she's brought Benny's. "It's like a different place in here, Sarah," he says, his voice carrying genuine admiration. Sarah sits with him for a moment, allowing herself a rare pause. She tells him about the many changes she's implemented, how she worked with the cooks on the new specials, encouraged the younger servers to bring fresh ideas, and even initiated a monthly community night where patrons bring in old photographs of the town to share stories over a meal. "It's more than a diner now, you know," she says thoughtfully. "It's like a little community in itself, and we're all a part of it." Mr. Grant listens intently, nodding with approval. He tells her he always knew she had it in her to bring this place to life, even if she didn't see it herself at first. His words stir a mixture of pride and gratitude in Sarah, and she realizes that Mr. Grant didn't just save her job, he gave her a purpose. The weight of the compliment touches her deeply, and she finds herself thanking him, not just for the opportunity, but for believing in her even when she hadn't. As the evening wears on, Mr. Grant stays at the diner, greeting customers, chatting with staff, and witnessing the bustling, cheerful environment that Sarah has worked so hard to cultivate. Sarah observes him from across the room, marveling at how much he trusted her from the beginning. Watching him chat with patrons, she feels a surge of pride and satisfaction, knowing that she has not only proven herself to Mr. Grant, but has also earned the respect and loyalty of her team. After the last table is cleared and the final checks are cashed, Mr. Grant approaches Sarah, shaking her hand firmly. Sarah, I think it's time we made this arrangement more official. You've shown the leadership, dedication, and passion it takes to make this place special, and I want you to be part of Benny's for the long run. He offers her a co-ownership stake, explaining that he wants her to share in the success she's helped create. Stunned and deeply moved, Sarah accepts, barely able to hold back tears. She realizes that Benny's Diner is no longer just a place she works. It's a part of her life and future, and she's now officially responsible for its success and the happiness of its patrons. That night, after Mr. Grant leaves, she sits quietly in one of the booths, taking in the empty diner and the echoes of laughter and conversation that still linger in the air. She feels a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude, knowing she has found her place in the world. As she switches off the lights and locks the door, Sarah thinks back to the journey that brought her here, from a rude waitress with little patience to a respected co-owner with a community of regulars who feel like family. Benny's Diner is now a place of joy, camaraderie, and history, and Sarah knows that with her dedication, it will continue to be for years to come.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.